So Devops walks into the Metaverse and learns. Two buzzwords, what could go wrong, right? So about me, it's not important what I do. If you want to go to my blog, you can read more on the DevOps stuff. But basically, I know you came for the DevOps, and I'm going to talk about the Metaverse. So I'm sorry about that. You want to know more about my history, just watch the video that was initially my talk that I submitted. But I figured I was bored with existing technology, so why not talk about the Metaverse instead of containers? And one of the things that I'd like to do is that I like to go into parallel worlds, hardware, software, IT, manufacturing, and now DevOps in the Metaverse. I don't know where it's going to end, but I figure if you're here, you might want to listen to my journey that I did the research. This is an experimental talk. There's going to be no silver lining. I'm sorry, this is research. And a lot of the slides are going to be references, so slides will be available. You can click through, and it's like, what was that thing about? Go explore this more into detail. I have 130 slides, so let's go for it. The Metaverse. Term started with a novel, Neil Stephenson. I know many of you might have read it. He didn't know what he was writing. Now he's called like the godfather of the Metaverse. He said, I didn't anticipate it like that, but that's how these things go. Some of you might remember Second Life, or Minecraft, which is also a Metaverse. Roblox is the hipster one now with the kids. Fortnite concerts, anyone who attended the concert? Raise your hand, anyone? Okay, it was pretty cool. A game that became like an event thing. VR chat, one of the new things where people hang out, just chill and chat. You can be whoever you want to be, a fox or kind of a carrot, it doesn't matter. Some think about the Metaverse as the glorified Zoom, right? Okay, that's another way of thinking about it. Then there's this, we all know. Nike recently kind of launched something, they call it Nikeland. It's an interesting twist in the way that they are selling shoes physically. Now they're doing this virtually, and they're making a link out of this. Some shoes are only available in their virtual land. And then Netflix kind of did like this weird experiment to promote a movie, but I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. But again, it's the idea that everybody has an idea, and nobody really knows what they're doing about this. But yeah, that's what makes it interesting. Just like DevOps, nobody knew what it was. And, we're all bringing it to the table. And it's early stage. We don't know where it's going to end. So we're all talking about metaverses, but in reality, currently, it's all about miniverses. We're all creating these separate worlds. Maybe one day we'll have the global dream of an internet, one internet, instead of having a few. But that's just the state the world is in right now. And for me, the best example, I don't know if the audio is coming through now.
It feels like an electric shock. It's so strange, isn't it? Yeah. Even when I touch myself.
Yeah. Watch this. One last one.
The rubber hand is in the middle.
This one? Okay.
He's feeling like it's his own hand.
See if you can tell me which one.
And then the touch it, he feels like it touches his own hand. And then, of course, right, it's that alternate feeling of reality.
I did not actually hurt you, did you? You didn't feel actual pain in your real hand.
But of course, like serverless, there's still servers. Metaverse, there's still hardware. So that's not going to go away for us. I think, being more on the technical side, we think like bandwidth is going to be massive. Somebody says we need a minimum of 1 gigabit per second to be able to get all the graphics right to work on this. So it's a little bit more than our form that we fill in to submit. So that makes it interesting again. So there's a bunch of specialized servers with GPUs and so on taking care of it. I didn't know about this stuff because we know about the traditional cloud vendors, which makes it interesting. But it's all about having GPUs and kind of optimize things, and even more specifically around VR and XR. So if you're new to that field, as I was just looking around like, okay, what's this running on? And this is kind of where these people are taking it on the hardware level or in the cloud. But the most important thing people talk about in kind of the engineering side is latency. And it's really annoying, and we all experienced it with a Zoom somebody on the other side saying something, waiting for the feedback, and it's getting annoying. And some of you might have this reality in their jobs, working in different regions, working on US region, Asian region, and having all that latency. But what people are trying to do now is they're cutting corners just to make it a reality. But we're not there yet, and even with 5G or something, that's kind of just a little bit last mile. We can't escape physics to solve the problem of latency. But the way we're getting around it, people would say the Fortnite concert was viewed by so many players at the same time. That's true, but they were contained on their own servers, only interacting with a limited set of people, 150, 200 people. So that's how they got around kind of the latency, is kind of keeping it a little bit more contained. And the other approach people use in games is they kind of predict what the movement is going to be. So if one player runs, and then with the latency, the other doesn't see him running yet, and then he's hit, what happens? So there might be a predictive action that the code is taking that is shot, and then all of a sudden he's revived, like, oh, well, the local kind of client decided he was shot, but he's not. So sometimes you see these glitches in the game, and it's just a way to get around this latency round trip of feedback. Interesting enough, I don't know if people have used Mosh, and any people. It's an SSH client which is built for kind of this latency problem. And people have predictive typing. So they type a command, it always appears on the other side, and then if somebody types something else differently, they get actually a correction state. So it's very similar to the game tactic of predictive things. A few of the other things, if you think about storage in kind of the gaming industry and how they do it, it's not an HTML file. It's like massive files. And they have their own system. The versioning control, good luck. It's all about binary storage and kind of making sure that happens. So that's something on its own. Just putting this here for reference, if you want to get into more of the cloud discussions of kind of local studios moving into the cloud, that's a good place to look at it. But the app engines in that world are game engines. So it's different from what we're used to, like your Node server and so on. It's game engines. And they have their own set of coding styles, their own set of kind of blueprinting wizards. And obviously, they're getting closer to containers, but most of them run on Windows, and then the GPU is annoying to be shared. But we're getting there. And CI/CD systems, I don't know any of the traditional ones really figuring it out how to build these game engines because they have different set of requirements. This is one if you want to look at it, Admiral. But the whole thing in that, we think about testing Chrome and Firefox, there's an explosion in that world. It's just so much more complex to test games on your Xbox, on various platforms. And I'm sorry, the metaverse will not solve your versioning problem, so that will not go away. Assets still need to be managed somehow. And again, for reference, there's a project called VFX open source project, the VFX reference platform, where they kind of standardize the distribution that's kind of used in kind of studios producing games or kind of metaverse stuff. So it's a place to look at. Standardize on Linux and Windows server things. Or another one, like we know the Linux Foundation, there's an Academy Foundation that's trying to build on open source media. Open file formats. Only 2 years ago, studios got together to share a standard. So pretty early still, but at least there's something that is happening in that space. And then there's the whole interoperability. Like if you do something on one game, can you take your asset or your avatar and import it into the next? So there's a whole game of interoperability. This is a good podcast to follow if you're interested in this. Having really trying to push this forward because a game is often built in a specific set of people working on this, on a game engine, and they've never looked outwards to kind of share some of their stuff. And then maybe the final thing on kind of like hardware and software or where this is going is a concept that I found is live ops. When people push out games, pushing them out because of the distribution, there's a lot of kind of volume that you have to download. So they're trying to avoid this download of new software for people. And the way they manage this is they have like a live ops person who keeps the game interesting. They play mini games on top of the game without changing any of the kind of game itself. Like go here, do a campaign there. And what's interesting that there's notions about people using this also to have people move across new servers or places of the game that needed to be upgraded that are running on a specific set of hardware. It's not like we do, like, kill the server, spin it back up. No, there's a lot more states, and people will be noticing that. So they're kind of like herding cats, like, please go to this new mini game, and then you're actually moving them to a new server, and then only a few people are impacted. But it makes you think the way we do ops currently, we've become a little bit more passive. We wait until the monitor alerts us. We wait until something happens. And what I found interesting of the live ops thing is they're actively engaging to see what's happening. So they have their own dashboard, but it's not passively. They go into the game. They go into their product to learn what the users need, what they do. So it's, for me, it was a learning that this is actually something we could do in our operational style and not just look at it passively. This is the new thread I'm starting now. Is like, what about doing operations in VR and AR? So obviously, kind of doing VR gives you infinite screen estate. I don't know if you look at a sock or something, like the number of screens, right? You can do this, or whiteboard. It's a kind of good benefit. And the other kind of example I found was people using AR to kind of define networking and kind of do it physically in a way that they kind of overlay what the network switches are doing, what are the endpoints. So again, interesting research, interesting stuff that people are doing. This is not so much VR, but the fact that you're visualizing your logging. I don't know if many people are doing this. Many just you create like a regex to do it, but again, interesting experiment that I found. And this is Kubernetes graphs, and what I found interesting over the years is that every time there's this graph that people put in their product, it's eye candy, and it's never useful, right? It's like this gimmick that sells it somehow, and then after a while you're like, okay, it doesn't do what I want. And I looked into, one of the reasons that it doesn't really work is that there's this conceptual thing that we need to be able to group things together in a graph quite easily, or hide things in a graph quite easily. And these tools are just like, it's all or nothing. And this is kind of a limit of like 7 concepts that you kind of are able to keep in your head. So there's a lot of research on that, but think about it like the next time you look at one of your kind of graphs on this. And so there's different ways of searching, splitting off the nodes that you want to see in the graph, filtering things, creating new nodes, putting them in a new place. But so far, all the products that I saw that actually use a graph, they're pretty much not there. But the research is there. This kind of separation of limiting the number of things that you can see in a graph resonated with me with the C4 model in documentation, where we kind of put the context and we were creating the abstractions in a way that things work together at different layers. And maybe kind of diagrams as code is now picking up a little bit. You're kind of checking this in your code and mix this thing. But don't make the same mistake as the graph and put like a complete graph. Try to think in components that you group together, 5 to 7 concepts, and that's kind of it. So make sure you're doing this. Related to visualizing things, there's a whole domain around digital twins, and it uses VR, it uses other ways of 3D visualizations, and it's used in manufacturing. And they make a virtual copy of something that exists in the real world, and then they can do calculations on reliability, on cost. What if I change something? People are building digital twins of oil platforms because it's costly when they do something and they have to go to that part. And so what we've been basically doing a long time ago in the data center, what happens if we change the flow of air or the heat, is now actually also happening in a way that people are thinking about modeling ops. So the first model, what we want to have, so think about as code or definitions, then we generate what we want, and then we kind of actually use and put this in production. So this notion about not just like cobbling things, but defining things is something that is getting pretty strong in our industry. And I know we all shied away from UML and kind of those days, but we're actually trying to resolve this problem, but we just reframed it as code in a way. So I think we're not seeing that as much. And we all know like both can be used as visualizations for information, whether it's a factory or your kind of AWS kind of visualization of your architecture. But there's a concept within digital twins, how you relate things back. And they talk about a digital model, a shadow, a generator, and a twin. And I would argue that it's about making it a feedback loop, right? If you think about continuous integration, it's like development and production, but there's no kind of direct feedback loop immediately. Continuous deployment makes it like whatever is in dev and tested automatically goes. So there's an immediate flow. And I think what we're trying to do with DevOps is currently we're more doing the continuous deployment about getting things from development in production, but we're not taking any corrective actions of putting things back from production immediately into dev. A good example of this, if you write some Terraform code, you specify the number of servers you want in an autoscaler, right? You define that, but in reality, the 5 servers you define might be 20 in production. So that dynamic part, why is that not reflected back to the code we're having or to the model when we do no changes? So that kind of connection isn't there. So it made me think like maybe we need to work on automating the feedback channel and not just talking about metrics and getting observability. It's kind of really make these two in sync. What's happening in production is also the new data we get on kind of the development environment. Some companies have called it cloud twins to make this direction between digital twins, but it's coming from the root from digital twins in manufacturing. And digital twins is not just about that like engine. Digital twins is now about doing complete cities. They have a model. What if we change the electricity line? What if we move something in the street? How will people change their behavior? So if they can do it, why can't we do it on our limited scale on a model that we're doing, if they can do it at that scale? And another kind of insight I had is that we're being so focused on building this abstraction layer with our code. And you can call it a digital twin, what we define, what goes in production, what goes in the development. But on the bottom, you will see there's humans involved. And when you kind of work in a SaaS company, my example was like when I work at Sneak, we would scan your environment as a customer. We would know what you have and kind of, make sure that we understand whether you have a load balancer or a server or code, and we're trying to tie this together. If you have one vulnerability, maybe you have it in your code, but it's blocked by your load balancer or by a proxy. So we shouldn't be alerting you kind of having these false positives because we're looking at individual parts. But if you would take it next level, if you make a digital twin of what the customer has and the technology, maybe we need to make a digital twin on how they're operating the model. What are they doing? What are the processes? Who's involved in what? So we can take it a next step further that we can say, well, please change this file, but contact that person. So kind of making almost like a customer twin to not just know the infrastructure, but to know their process as well. Anyway, it's far out. I'm sorry about that, but it's kind of reason of thinking. Right, coming back to VR and kind of presenting things, people have been experimenting virtualization, whether that's the first Linux processes or your Kubernetes in kind of any of the virtual worlds. Some went a little bit further in their demos, and they kind of like made this visualization and be able to zoom in on who's doing what and on the master. The concept is not new. It's been in software city mapping for a while. You kind of see where your biggest kind of areas are, where the code lies down together. And some go Kubernetes in VR. They can click and they look at zoom in, or like hold more of the dynamics. Another example is people looking at capture the flags and doing games. They see all the processes, they have people shooting. Like all the examples I'm giving here is people experimenting in that phase. I'm not saying there's a product there, but it's kind of like everybody's trying to figure out like where is this happening. Is this the metaverse? Well, no, but it's kind of like a metaverse if we collaborate in this way together. But the reality of doing anything in VR, we're not there yet. Like resolution got better, field of view around you got better. Vision correction, I, for example, have eyeglasses. I can see very close, but looking far in VR, even with adapted lenses, doesn't work for me. The ergonomics of the battery still is a hassle. Changing this, like having a bulk projection. So I don't think we're going to be there now, but if we're kind of solving more of these problems, our dynamic of being able to collaborate in the Kubernetes examples that I gave might change. So for me, that's kind of far out, but it is encouraging and kind of keep looking if anything changed in the dynamic.
Ah, I see you have the machine that goes bing!
Yeah, so I don't know how many people actually, originally had, like when the server went down, like ping, that that something has happened, kind of that. So where can we take that? What people have tried? And it's called like auditory displays in a way. Some have been looking at the network. It was an experiment, like whatever goes on, so you kind of know after a while, is this a normal pattern, yes or no? It's pretty annoying to listen to, but people have worked around this.
That was Mark, and I'm Seth. You're currently listening to Glide Server
Turn it into a
Infrastructure.
radio that people could tune
Glide
in.
Radio is an open...
And some have even... make the strength of your password audible, right? I'm not saying this is the perfect idea, but it's an experiment. People have tried to create sounds of their CI systems. And this is an experiment that GitHub did. Anything that happened as an event. So if you're mindfulness, could you listen to this all day? Me not, but maybe there's some variation that we'll be able to get at in this place. Okay, we could probably visualize Bitcoin. But even some of the diagrams, they have like data as code where you kind of play a graph and listen to it, whether there was some whatever. So again, interesting stuff. All right, next chapter. I know I'm going full steam ahead, but virtual production is something that was on the visual effects studios. So kind of actors trying to do crazy stuff, probably not Tom Cruise, but kind of like they made repurposed game engines, which already exist, like kind of building that. And then they kind of create these virtual sets and the whole background into this. And then the next step they took is that they didn't actually need it to be on location. They just put like these big LED walls of people looking like they're there. They adapt the lighting, and it's a much way cheaper of kind of doing shootings on set. You can try a little bit of this on yourself at home. If you have a VR base station, people have been building this DIY kind of camera where you have like a tracker, it tracks where you are, and you can kind of film people in the virtual world. Like this person, the backdrop on the bottom, you see him filming the person, but the reality is behind it. So it's a simple trick, live compositing, something you could do. So if you want to like extend your zoom to the next level, you could try this. All right, so we have the background kind of faking it. Next step is like meta-humans. And the meta-humans is more about how realistic can we get the avatars? How realistic are we able to scan people? Right? This is not the most realistic. This recently got some flack. Mark Zuckerberg posting about the new thing. But remember that I talked about the bandwidth? That's the reason why they look so simple. Because if we need to transform a whole body with all the nuances, that is going to be a problem. So bear that in mind if you laugh at this, that it's actually a good reason to do this. In the past days, people would get scanned with a lot of cameras. And now these days, it becomes much simpler. You create a character almost, like a virtual character. You take one picture, and then you start having this generated by AI. And then you clean up actually how that person looks, the wrinkles, and so on. And it's like an overlay on top of that 3D body. But there's always something more that you need to do. Virtual makeup, tattoos, and it never ends. But we really want to make it realistically. And I think about, that picture is starting to look really realistic. And that has been released about a year ago. Unreal Engine released their MetaHuman product, where you could mix your own face with some of those things and start really juggling and making it very realistic. And then you can choose the body you want. But with a body, it's really hard. You can maybe go into the face and adapt the face, but then you still need the motion to do things. And puppeteering is the one way you see all the kind of skeleton parts. And they're one of the ways you can do it. You can build a lot of trackers, but you see there's 2 on the feet, 2 on the hands. It's really clunky to do this stuff. And people have kind of gotten better to understanding that there's a whole physics model to this, and they're able to understand how the joints of the body actually work. So again, we're getting a model, not just the data, and we're improving things. And now with computer vision, we're able to just look at the body instead of having a person that has all the trackers. So another advancement in the field. And you could say the same things about the head, tracking the different areas of the mesh of the face. And you can go wild. You can track the tongue, which is still hard. You can do hair tracking these days. But reality of an actor usually looks like this. But we can get it now down to a camera recording a face. Face and hand tracking, I told you the gloves might seem like the obvious idea. But now people are using a watch to just watch the little variations in your muscles to kind of track what is moving. And for example, Apple has experimented with this in their assistive touch. So what you do, they're actually having that bracelet to do it. And then, if you want to go really wild, what people are doing, create their own avatars for life, you can search for the concept of VTubers. Next, we got the avatar, we got a little bit of the body scanning. What about the lips and the voice? Text-to-speech, how hard can it be, right? We make a model out of this, we make audio, but there's a problem, right? There's a one-to-many problem. There's so many variations if you have the word bird, how it will sound like. So it's not an easy thing to do that. And on top of that, whether your origin or your age are a difference, there's even the emotions. And that's where still there's a problem in expressing this in an easy way. How do you express emotions, what is happening there? But you can buy voices. You can record your own voice. And something, if you think about doing the text-to-speech, one of the editors, Overdub, allows you to edit your text. It uses the voice that you recorded with. It will be able to remove your filler words, make it a smooth sound, and even if you type extra words, you're able to kind of generate the whole presentation. So I've edited presentations like this where I'm all the time but this is kind of, next level of technology to prepare that stuff. And once we have the lips kind of going, we have the sound. If there's sound, we know how the lips and the faces are moving, something Disney already know when they kind of explain it in kind of the cartoons. And then from the audio, we can have the lips generated. So there's no more need for the scanning directly. And then if we take it a step further, text to something, there's a new kind of field coming up, which is prompt engineering. And prompt engineering, you just type whatever you like. An armchair in the shape of an avocado. And then, boom, this is generated from all the information that's all on the internet. Want to take it a step further? Sorry, this is kind of a weird DALL-E if you want to follow it. There's some good things that are happening there. This is a recording of somebody playing tennis. And just by editing on a sandy beach, the next thing is on the moon. You see how seamless this kind of things is getting? I'm just amazed at this technology, how this is working. Coming back a little bit to our field, right? It's not maybe that amazing, but we all learned a little bit of Copilot with the GitHub, looking at like all our code. You can use it for Terraform. It kind of starts to understand a little bit more of what you want to type. And all of a sudden, right, you only type a bit less. So AI is assisting in the things that we're doing. It's not overtaking, but it's making our lives just as people creating content, us creating code. And this is an example of somebody doing design. Create an app with a navigation bar, a camera icon, blah, 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 and boom, it's generated, right? Like no coding, but it's just creating this stuff. I find it fascinating that we can kind of express these things in a good way. And who remembers all the CSS settings? Just type it. It generates some CSS, and we're good. Probably not for the specialists, but for the mere mortals like me doing CSS, this will be a blessing. And this is another example I found doing it in a shell. Undo the most recent git command. It feels like natural language. It suggests the command, and then you can execute it yes or no. Or whoever works with Kubernetes syntax, could we have like please a more natural language to do this and generate the YAML for us? Maybe there's a link that we can make that makes it happen. Or all the CLI commands, just have it like generate things, and whatever we describe, it actually gets us. Or inline editing. We know like you want to have a reverse proxy for a certain site. Okay, I don't have to know all the syntax. It will figure this out for me. We're still going to be verifying, but after a while, maybe we're getting so good, and the data is getting so good that this is a solved problem. Again, I don't know where this is going. People are trying. Is it useful or not? I find it fascinating. Sorry about sharing my passion with you. Last chapter, synthetic media. We've already created like some things that weren't there. The avocado, nobody like created that picture. We just described it. AI made it. We could build deepfakes, right? And people think about deepfakes on like, oh, this is something bad and it's going to happen. And you will still be able to tell it. But I'm telling you, I can't tell the difference which face is real. And it's all generated. And there's real-time generators. You don't need to have stock photos anymore. Like you don't need to have like, I created the first slide just going into DALL-E. An engineer walks into the metaverse and needs like a rainbow. Poof, created. Easy. But sometimes it can be too fake. There was an article about showing profile pictures on LinkedIn, and they have the exact generation. Like, you see the cross, exact dimensions. And then you'll be able to tell the difference. Some people have used deepfakes for good. It's like a lip sync. You put the lips of somebody talking like me now at a conference, somebody translating my English into whatever language, and they're changing my lips as if I am speaking in that language, and you can't tell the difference. And the reason why it is, like, it gets my emotions. I don't have to describe it, and that's why the puppeteering is so interesting that you can do this. Another great example of kind of deepfakes is therapy. This is an experiment that they did, is people who have lost their relatives. They created like a real-time deepfake to say goodbye to that person. And they knew it wasn't real, much like the rubber hand, but it felt so good to say goodbye. Just want to put that in there. Not all deepfakes are bad, right? It's dangerous technology if used wrong, but can be really powerful. And this is probably not the best use case for this, but we could do that. Another example, we're creating virtual tennis matches who have never been created. So what about using this for new betting? I don't know, like things you always wanted to see that people played and never played against each other. And the deepfakes can also be helping to enhance actually the graphics that we build, because we have the real face, and then we can use a better model to kind of make it more realistic. And then final example is, this is technology that's out there. It's called Synthesia. You type the text, it creates an audible person. You cannot really tell it's not a human. It's like has the nice intonation, everything there. And I find it amazing as a technology. All right. I'm going the wrong way, or I'm not going the good way. All right. All ecosystem, we all laughed at the CNCF, but hey, guess what? Those other ecosystems have their own play at this. And I think my takeaway is all this technology, I don't know where it's happening, but it's going at an accelerating pace. And for me, that's interesting, because there's always going to be generalists, because there's so many fields coming together, and they kind of need to kind of work together. And maybe, we'll be able, as a DevOps collaboration, and go across the silos to be able to help those people. Some of the books you want to look at for reference. And I guess, I don't know. Tell me what you thought about this. Was this inspiring or not? Let me know. And besides that, muchas gracias. And thank you for all being here. All right. I could take questions, but I'm probably over time, so. You can find me in the hallway. I'm here all day, so thank you. You have time? Yeah, sure. All right. Anyone trying to get out of the light?
Sorry, this is not going to be super exciting, but can you just back up to the book slide? I wanted to snag a photo of it. Thanks.
Yeah, I heard that the video is going to be online, so the whole slide is going to be online. So I know it was quick, 134 slides. So.
So what are your thoughts about Metaverse as the next step beyond chat ops, to bring it back to the DevOps world? Does that, you were criticizing visual graph-based representations of Kubernetes, and now we're all doing DevOps through Zoom. Is there any potential there in your mind?
It's a good question. It's not something I specifically thought of, and I wasn't criticizing the fact that we're building the graphs or the visualization. I'm just saying that the way we're doing it right now is not completely solving the problem in that way. So I see that the collaboration in that space, again, when we sort out part of the VR, then I think it has a better shot. But again, if a Zoom meeting is still better than not communicating, and so if we can get a whiteboard and make that happen, I'm all for it. The hard thing is, with all this technology, is to predict when. But I figure, right, like my basement was full of generations of servers when I was young, and now it's getting full with XR and VR material and all that stuff. And once at a certain point, we'll reach it. Yeah, I'm sorry if I can't be more specific on it, but yeah, that's it.
So once you take all the cool out of it, this is really scary. And so I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are about control.
It's a question that comes up, I think, in all these presentations about, using it with like an ethical mindset and not abusing this. I deliberately stayed away on this because I'm like exploring the tech, and like any tech, it's good and bad. But let's say if we take deepfakes, right, as an example. There's different takes on that. There's people saying like, yeah, we have to build in watermarking. We'll have to make sure that there's an origin always, and so on. And there's only so much we can do with tech. And then there needs to be a legal system. But the legal system will also not cover everything. If you want to abuse something, right, it's really hard to stop that in an absolute way. Take the example of the Visa card, right? You assume that there's no fraud by people taking the number of your card and that's going. But there's a backing in case there's an issue with this. And that's already a good step in that it's like recognized that it's like a problem you might have and that we need to sort out. But I'm afraid legislation is going to be too late. But whether I'm using it for good and somebody else not, again, it's like a hard thing to do and to make sure that's not happening. But of course, like I want everybody to use it ethically, and you will see in deepfakes people asking always permission about the video footage they're using, but some will not. I guess some will follow your pipeline and some will not. So yeah, there's not a perfect way to stop this, I'm afraid.
Patrick, next question over here to your right.
Hi, Patrick. Really enjoyed the presentation. You covered a lot of detail, and I do this for my day job, and there was even a few surprises for me in there. The question I have is, when we look at the scope and variety of the technology that we're talking about, you've been in the technology space for a long time. Do you see in your imagination a time in the near future where we feel like the pendulum swings back away from technology being the domain of a specific individual and it becoming more of a widespread, everyday person involvement through the use of these kinds of technologies? Like, is this the time, is this the moment when we see the pendulum reverse and it becomes more of an everybody has it versus we're the keepers of the tech?
We have a role, but like in any company, when people say, well, developers are the kingmakers of the company, it's just a fallacy, right? So we can think about it as, well, I think of it as one piece of the puzzle, but the business is probably going to be another part of it. Whether some technology succeeds, yes or no, is these days maybe very dependent on what Apple thinks, what Meta thinks they can market. And to have that market and to have that spread, yes, they need a lot more consumers, but our kind of tech part will probably be the least part that contributes to the big success on the metaverse succeeding in general. It's important, but there's so many other aspects like how NFTs will go, how's the opinion on these things of kind of blockchain, yes or no, which we don't have control over. So I wouldn't overplay our role as a technology person because it's like one of the pieces of the puzzle that we need to solve.
Hello?
Hi. We've been hearing a lot about metaverses, and you brought up some examples like Roblox and Minecraft and other games. Can you tell me the difference between metaverse and MMO, if any?
The question is the difference between the metaverse and MMO. I think maybe technically there might not be a difference, but the MMO has more of a connotation with certain things on gaming and playing, where I think the metaverse could be on a lot more different things and appeal to other parts of our life. So that's kind of how I see the difference. It's like people saying before any of the DevOps word was coined, we were doing DevOps right before DevOps was there, and they can, just as you could have done it with the MMO, but it's just like a moment in time where people are like, okay, that's kind of how we did it, and that was our audience, and now we brought it to a different audience and to maybe a broad spectrum. So, but both could relate to that. Again, I'm not the expert in these things. I'm just exploring, but I'm trying to create awareness on what's happening in that field because I felt it was so far away from the form submit async API reply. And I always want to understand things that, like, in technology that are happening, and I didn't know a lot on this stuff.
Hello. First of all, super cool talk. That was amazing. I just was curious if you could see any practical use for like the metaverse in a regular organization for today. Like what would that look like?
I think somebody mentioned it. Maybe it's not in the metaverse in the broad sense where we have like thousands of people running, but in the VR sense, obviously, kind of getting together on a whiteboard and discussing things, and you see that whether it's in our industry or in kind of electrical engineers looking at a motor at different ways, that there's already a use case. Again, the VR headsets is kind of not there yet, and it's wearing you out in the batteries, but if that starts to improve, I think we might get closer to that. But one of the things on the VR slide where we're not yet is the see-through. So imagine you're doing work, but you can't see through. You're like locked here, and you kind of like can't be at your monitor. You can't type, and there's still like so many things you can't do. So the actual use is still limited due to the ergonomics and stuff. But the fact that you're able to have that shared discussion and have a sense that you're almost standing in the same room and kind of figuring out the problem, or even, displaying something that like is larger than you and you don't have the space and you kind of have like a better overview. Those are like the immediate things. The example I showed on, the Kubernetes viewer, so these were experiments, and I understand that, but there's going to be some value in visualizing what we're starting to build better. And then maybe like, well, what about this? Like, what if I put another thing in that? And it's almost like Minecraft, like, going to be so easy, but we still have to build a system right now to accommodate that. But I hope some of the examples are just inspiring for people to maybe think on, what could this be? I had the, again, I think in parallels, and then people say, I asked the question, what could deepfake mean for DevOps? I have no clue, right? But then it makes me think about, well, they're putting a face on somebody else, maybe, right? But if you think about the Spotify model, it's something they take in one context and they put in another context. And it doesn't work because it only has like the face, and there's so many things that are not working. And you could say that by Agile or DevOps and so on. But it's kind of like these analogies, like the live ops, what can we learn that make it bad? So not in the immediate term, it's not going to boom or something. But we all know, we all love some visualizations that are actually useful in our job, and we're dealing with more and more complex systems. So that's going to be used that I can see go quite fast if you solve that. And that might be not in VR, but even in 3D, that we're getting better at the data there.
Oh, question. So you might have already put this in one of the 130 slides, but I think just like DevOps in the beginning, one thing that plagued it was a lack of a standard definition. And so we had the question, is it like MMO? Someone says, no, it's AI. Someone says, no, it's playing Doom. Have you come across a definition of the metaverse that you thought made sense right now?
Yeah, I think the simplest one was I put like, it just feels like an alternate reality. And that's so broad, and it's not per se a definition, but there's a little story on DevOps. DevOps Day's first event, everybody asked to have, can you specify it? Can we have a manifesto? Can we write this down? And I was being the person who says, like, don't do it. Like, Agile has, their principles. ITIL had like 17 books, and it still wasn't clear. And I like the fact that it's not clear because that it will keep evolving. So if people are like putting it down right now too much in one direction, we might miss something. And that's why I don't have a favorite definition or like specific definitions. But I'm sure everybody looking at it at a certain angle will try to get their part in the game. Yeah, so it's not the best answer, but if you look at the first book that I mentioned on the metaverse, I think on a book perspective, this is one of the no fluff descriptions of a book. So it's not going to go per se in the business side. They say like, okay, this is what playing on the market, this is what working, this is what not working. So I'd recommend maybe like the book as a definition in a little bit, in that it's a consistent view on the space that's actually useful. But cramming it down into like 5 lines, I haven't seen that happen.
We have time for one more question. Who's got one? All right.
My question ultimately is, would you mind carrying this into an open space so we can discuss it more? And then I actually have an answer for the gentleman that just asked a question. The definition differences that I've heard between MMO and Metaverse is an MMO allows for story-driven, objective-driven things you have to do, right? You have objectives within the game. In the Metaverse, you have options and freedom to do as you wish. So your ability to not follow any sort of storyline. Your ability to just go off and do something, create something on your own in a platform that allows you to interact with others, as opposed to something that usually has story-driven quests, raids, whatever you'd like to do. So that's the definition that has been explained to me.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, thank you for that. And how about a round of applause for Patrick? Thank you.